My name is Mason Kennedy. I'm a company employee living with my parents. I don't have any siblings, and it's just me, my mother, and my father living together. However, one day, my mother passed away. I suggested to my grieving father to try working, and he soon found a job and started working. However, there was a temporary worker who tried to drive my father out and started harassing him. But later on, that temporary worker didn't know that her actions would lead to the biggest crisis of his life. I was born from a late pregnancy, and my father and mother were significantly older than me, but we had a decent relationship, and although we weren't wealthy, we lived a happy life. However, 3 years ago, one day, my mother suddenly passed away. The cause was a stroke, and she was only 59 years old. It was shocking to say goodbye so suddenly, and the image of my mother, who had been so lively until yesterday, turning cold right before my eyes, still flashes back to me. In addition, my father's despair after losing my mother was severe, and my beloved father, who lost his wife, was becoming more and more absent-minded day by day. My father and mother were a loving couple even from my perspective as their son, so I guess it couldn't be helped. Time passed, and today I was making a suggestion to my father. It was about trying to work at the company as an elderly person. Elderly workers are dispatched mainly to people aged 60 and over by a public interest corporation called the Elderly Manpower Center. My father was the same age as my mother, so he's 62 years old this year. It's possible for him to register as an elderly worker. My father used to work as a salesperson for a company, and I heard from my mother that his performance was remarkably excellent. If that's the case, then surely my father's skills would still be useful in society. But, Mason, your old man worked as a salesperson in the past. We have enough savings. Is there a need for me to work? I nodded without hesitation at my father's question. Yeah, that's true. Economically speaking, there's no need for you to work. But lately, you've been spacing out more and more, and I'm worried. So if you work, maybe you'll be like your old self again. I could feel my words becoming a bit choked up as I spoke. The reason my father was downcast was that a hole had opened in his heart after losing my mother. So even if he worked hard like he used to, he wouldn't be the same father as before. No matter how much he worked, it would only be a temporary distraction. I understood that. But still. I was about to continue, but then my father put his hand on my shoulder. It's not good for me to worry my son so much. Your mother would scold me too. Okay, I understand. I'll try working for a bit. My father smiled gently and immediately took out his phone to check the location of the nearby Elderly Manpower Center. Seeing my father like that, I felt relieved inwardly, but for some reason, I also felt a slight unease. And then, a few days later, the reason for that unease became clear. Mason, I've already found a job. It's at this company. This company? Yeah, it just happened to catch my eye. Well, I'll be counting on you, boss. The job my father found at the Elderly Manpower Center turned out to be at the same company where I worked. A few days later, I was at the office as usual. Hey, Kennedy, good morning. Oh, good morning. Just an ordinary morning conversation. But I could tell. My colleague had a slightly smug expression. I've got the latest on your old man today. You want to hear? Actually, this colleague of mine, despite being in the same department as my father, was quite the informant. As soon as my father joined this company, he immediately found out that he was my father. And since that day, he had been telling me everything about my father's work at the company. Oh, sure, Sure, go ahead, tell me. I had already heard about my father's work at the company, of course, both from him directly and from others. But my father was a reserved person. Even if there were any troubles, he would probably choose to endure them alone. In case that happened, having an informant like this colleague who could tell me things from an outsider's perspective was quite valuable. Don't look so indifferent. I know you're a good son who cares about his parents, so I'm just keeping you updated on your old man. I appreciate it. So, how is my father doing? Extremely well. Even the section chief Matt praised him as a competent person. I see. Since I had already heard from my father himself that he was doing well in the department, I wasn't particularly surprised about that. I felt a sense of relief deep down. Oh, and, Suddenly, my colleague faltered. He had been in high spirits just a moment ago, but now he frowned suspiciously. It's not really good news, more like, well, there's something going on. What happened? It was news to me, so I leaned in to listen to my colleague's story. Just then, the department head interrupted us. What are you two talking about for so long? It's already working hours. Oh, sorry, boss. Kennedy, catch up later. Interrupted by the sudden appearance of the department head, my colleague hurried back to his department. You two, get back to your seat quickly. Yes, sorry. With things going this way, it was impossible for me to ask my colleague about what happened immediately. Feeling increasingly anxious about my father, I returned to my seat. And then, a few hours later, the incident occurred. Hey, Kennedy, your old man seems to have tripped on the stairs and got injured. Ha! Hearing the hurried words of my colleague, I rushed to my father's department. There, as my colleague had said, I saw my father with slightly scraped knees. Are you okay, Dad? Ah, I'm fine. Just tripped on the stairs a bit, he said with a laugh. However, I felt something fishy, so I was about to question my father, but then, suddenly, my colleague pulled my hand and led me to an empty corridor. What's going on? Why all of a sudden? Surprised, I asked my colleague, who usually had a cheerful face but now looked serious. Hey, you know, just before your old man fell down the stairs, he was arguing with Amber. I don't know the reason, though. Ha! What's that about? It's hard to imagine my usually gentle father arguing with someone. But there was more to the story. And, your dad was apparently arguing with Amber right before he fell. Seriously? So, does that mean Amber tried to push my father down the stairs? There were rumors of her being harsh, but to push someone down the stairs, it could have been catastrophic. I headed to my father's side. There, just like before, was my father smiling cheerfully. Surely, even if I confronted my father now, he would deflect. Of course, Amber would do the same. So, all I could do was watch over my father. Dad, just don't overdo it, okay? Yeah, I know. With just those words, I couldn't do anything else but return to my department. Days passed since the commotion of my father falling down the stairs. Afterwards, it seemed my father managed to return to his usual work. I heard from my colleague that things were going smoothly with his co-workers, too. The only remaining worry is Amber, I thought. Indeed, the biggest problem remaining was the temp worker, Amber. She had been harassing my father with verbal abuse daily, forming factions within the department. Though my colleagues and supervisors tried to shield him, her methods were insidious, and they couldn't cover it all. And then, another incident occurred. That day, I happened to have some business with my colleague and went to see him, which was rare. In the hallway on the way there, I stumbled upon a scene where Amber, as usual, was harassing my father while surrounded by her cronies. And worse, she was hurling insults at my father.
Hey, old man, cut it out. You won't last long here anyway. Seriously, I don't know if it's because your wife passed away or what, but if you come here to flirt, it's a real nuisance.
With such despicable words, she laughed and spoke to my father. My father, though usually patient, couldn't bear it. He glared sharply at Amber.
What? If you want to hit me, go ahead.
Somewhat intimidated, Amber began to provoke him. I had a bad feeling about this. It seemed Amber was intentionally provoking my father to retaliate, so she could play the victim and legally get my father fired from the company. She must have had this plan from the beginning. I had already heard about Amber from my colleague. Before my father joined, she received various support from others. However, after my father joined, all the support she received shifted towards him, leaving her with none. That's why Amber planned to drive my father out to reclaim her previous situation. But such selfish motives couldn't be tolerated. Just as I was about to intervene to stop my father from doing anything rash, the department head intervened. I heard everything. Behind my father stood the department head and Amber's superior.
Why is the department head here?
Amber trembled as if she'd seen a ghost. Of course. The department head had said he had heard everything. In other words, he had heard the decisive moment when Amber verbally abused my father. If so, Amber's position would shift from victim to perpetrator. The department head, with a glance at Amber, began to explain calmly. Amber, we've received various reports about your behavior. That's why I decided to conduct a thorough investigation this time. Did you think we wouldn't act without decisive evidence? Amber's face turned pale as she collapsed. Now all of Amber's plans would crumble. Next, the department head bowed to my father. I'm sorry, Mr. Kennedy. If we had acted sooner, we wouldn't have caused you such discomfort. It's okay. You have a position to uphold. The department head bowed deeply, and my father, as always, laughed. On the other hand, I was completely dumbfounded. My father and the department head were, of course, in a superior-subordinate relationship. Yet, why were they so frank? Well, that's because your old man was the ace of this company. Wow. My colleague, who had suddenly appeared, was standing there. He continued without reacting to my astonishment. This company has been greatly supported by several companies, but most of those companies have had contracts brought in by one salesman. That would be my dad. Exactly. By the way, the department head was apparently one of my dad's subordinates at the time. Various facts were coming to light one after another, but that explained why my father wanted to start working at the company where his son worked. It probably meant that his connections were valuable. Well, your old man is a legend in this company. Man, I'm surprised too. By the way, are you gonna spread this to everyone? Of course. Figured as much. Thus, news about my father spread throughout the company, and in the end, my father settled as a consultant for the company. Well, the original goal was achieved, so there was no problem. My father also said, if everyone says so, I can't escape. I guess I'll be working for life." And he laughed heartily. Oh, and as for Amber, she couldn't renew her contract and left the company. Well, she wasn't exactly a capable worker to begin with, so it was only natural. Anyway, despite all the worry I had before, in the end, there wasn't much I could do for my father. It just goes to show how high the presence of my father was. I also pledged in my heart to strive for promotion just like my father. How was today's story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.